Perfect. Okay. Well, thank you everyone for being here. I'm Kristen McKinney. I am the Chief of Staff and Chief Financial Officer for the Division of Graduate Education here at UCLA, and we are super happy to be co-hosting this Schmidt Science Scholars Information Session. And we're really happy that you all can join us today to hear about this unique and exciting postdoctoral opportunity. Just to give you a little bit of, what we're going to cover. So we'll start out with a little bit of an overview of the program and the application process, and then we will jump into a Q&A session with the former scholars who are joining us today. And we have some pre-submitted questions that folks had submitted when they signed up to participate in the webinar, and we'll probably go through those first, and then we'll take live questions. And we have a couple of options from that. You can use the Q&A in the Zoom. We also, once we get to the Q&A section, you can raise your hand and we can unmute you if you would prefer to ask your question verbally, if that's easier. So we can do both of those options when we get there. So without further ado, I am going to introduce Cynthia Gonzalez-Saylor, who is a Funding Opportunities Officer in the Office of Research and Creative Activities, who is going to give an overview of the Schmidt Science Scholars program and the application process. So I will hand it over to you, Cynthia.
Thank you, Kristen, and thanks everyone for joining us, and a special thanks to GOT for being here with us today and helping our students with any questions that they may have about this program. So just some general background, the Schmidt Science Fellows program, as you all may have read, it does aim to develop the next generation of science leaders with a focus in the natural sciences, engineering, mathematics, and computing. And essentially, Schmidt feels that you need to be able to look, at these world pressing problems that they want you to solve through multiple interdisciplinary lenses. The goal of the program is to give the world's best aspiring scientific minds a broader perspective, the ability to engage in this interdisciplinary way, and the opportunity to make this lasting impact in society. So through a combination of group sessions at some of the world's leading universities and a special postdoctoral study in a field that is different from your existing expertise, fellows are exposed to new topics, new ways of thinking, and this broad community of scientists and supporters of interdisciplinary science that will help drive sector-wide change and guide your future path to success. So the big highlight here is that the Schmidt Science Fellows program really does emphasize a pivot from your current field. The candidate's proposed research pivot should represent a genuine and innovative disciplinary departure from their PhD studies, with a clear goal towards gaining new skills in a new area and establishing field-leading interdisciplinary lines of research with potential high reward and societal impact. To be eligible for nomination and a potential selection as a Schmidt Science Fellow, candidates for these postdoc positions have to meet certain criteria. And you'll see some of these in our posting on the UCLA InfoReady portal. The information's all there, but it's essentially this year, you have to have conducted your graduate degree in the natural sciences. This includes astronomy, biology, chemistry, physics, and earth sciences. Engineering, mathematics, or computing, as I mentioned before, and this includes all subdisciplines therein, those areas. You also must have completed or expect to complete all of the requirements for the conferral of your PhD by UCLA in one of these fields between May 15th, 2023 and June 30th, 2024. And of course, these are the dates for the 2024 cycle of the program. Next year, they'll be different. Another eligibility point is that you have to be available for the entire period of the 2024 program, and that'll run from April 2024 to November 2025. This period also includes the onboarding activities, the attendance of the global meeting series, and a senior fellows event. So yeah, in conjunction with the program, fellows must be willing to consider multiple options in which to complete their interdisciplinary research pivot. And the fellows program does not allow concurrent fellowships, which would impose demands on your time and ability to be fully involved with the Schmidt program and attend the meetings and be active in your placement. And just a reminder that all of this information could also be found on the Schmidt Science Fellows program website and our internal posting. And now just some brief information about the award. It includes a stipend of $100,000 a year to support personal and living costs for the duration of the placement, and support from the program to identify and undertake that 12 to 24-month postdoc placement in one of the world-leading laboratories. And of course, in a field, and we can't emphasize this enough, in a field that represents an interdisciplinary pivot. Two components to the program is the postdoc research fellowship and the global meeting series, as we discussed. And then just briefly, I can talk about the internal process a bit. So to submit an application for this cycle or future cycles, you'll visit the UCLA InfoReady portal. And this opportunity does come up on a yearly basis at the moment. Things are always subject to change depending on the funder, but it is an annual opportunity. And it does tend to get posted and announced in early to mid-March. So we'll post the opportunity in our website and accept applications until an internal deadline that is set by our office this year. That internal deadline is April 17th. After April 17th, we compile all the internal applications and put together some information for a review committee that usually consists of research deans of the various schools at UCLA, faculty with expertise in some of the areas in which we received applications. And they evaluate it based on the criteria that is sometimes shared by the program and just, of course, just for the alignment and to make, they use the information in the overview and the background of the program to pick the most compelling candidates. This year, we have been invited to nominate 4 individuals for this opportunity. And so after April 17th, we'll compile the applications and send it over to the internal review committee, who will make a selection in about 2 weeks' time. And UCLA has to submit the names of the nominees to the program and provide the selected candidates with an authorization code. But we must submit the names by May 12th this year. And then by June 1st, nominees must register their intent to apply and just provide a short set of preliminary information through an online application portal that Schmidt will open. The full application materials are due July 17th. And then from August to October 2023, there's an academic review with expert reviewers from Schmidt assess the submitted applications to ID the exceptional candidates for progression. From November to December 2023, there's a cross-panel review at Schmidt where an internal review committee considers academic reviewer recommendations and outcomes are communicated to the candidates in this timeframe. From January to February 2024, there's a round of final interviews where senior figures from across science, business, and society review application materials and carry out video interviews with finalists. And then in March 2024, there's another internal review at Schmidt where the internal review committee considers the applications and recommendations across all panels. And then in April 2024, you'll have the final decisions from the Schmidt Science Fellows Board, who determined the 2024 cohort. And then after April 2024, there's the onboarding for the successful candidates that have been selected to proceed as Schmidt Science Fellows. And they work together with Schmidt's academic council to determine the host lab for their research placement. And then in May 2024, it's the formal announcement where Schmidt Science Fellows announces the 2024 cohort of the fellows. And then from July 2024 to October 24 is when the fellowship placements begin for this cycle. So in 2024, they start, selected candidates or nominees or winners, sorry, will start to engage with the program team, the academic council mentors, and other members of their cohort and start their research placements and join their first global meeting. So yeah, just a reminder, by May 12th, UCLA must provide the names of the selected candidates. Our internal applications, if you're interested in applying for the 2024 cycle, are due April 17th. And then if you are selected as one of the 4 nominees, then by June 1st, you have to register your intent to apply with Schmidt and submit a full application by July 17th.
Excellent. Thank you, Cynthia. And I'm assuming you have this information all on your website, so folks can look that up. Should we share that?
Yes,
that
I was just, I was going to post it in the chat. Yes.
Perfect. Fantastic. All righty. Okay, so should we, I know, would you like to go ahead and introduce the scholars?
Sure. We have from UC Berkeley, Natsumi Komatsu, and from Princeton, Professor Jyotirmoy Mandal. Natsumi, if you could just perhaps maybe get us started and introduce yourself, and perhaps tell us what you're doing and your
research. How did you wind up as a Schmidt Science Fellow, and what are you working on? How about that?
Sounds great. So hi everyone, my name is Natsumi. I got my PhD from Rice University back in Houston, Texas, where I was doing, I would say, material science, condensed matter physics, and with the Schmidt Science Fellow, pivoting from the material science background to I would say biophysics, a little bit of neuroscience these days. I was initially at UCLA as a postdoc, but then I recently got transferred to UC Berkeley. So that's where I am right now. And really nice to see everyone today.
I guess I can go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, I was trying to introduce you and realized I didn't unmute myself.
Of course. Hi, everyone. My name is Jyoti. I am currently working in Princeton. I did my PhD in applied physics in Columbia University in New York. And I was back then working on optical materials for energy applications. And for my Schmidt Science Fellowship, I decided to pivot to still optical materials, but for imaging applications. And I was in UCLA for about 2.5 years during the COVID times as a Schmidt Science Fellow. And since then, I have moved to Princeton. That's where I am now. Nice to meet everyone.
So much. Okay, so I'm going to start out with some of the pre-submitted questions, some of which I know Cynthia may jump in on because they are related to kind of requirements and whatnot. And then if folks do have, folks who are joining us today on the webinar, please do put any questions that you have either in chat or the Q&A. We will monitor both. So go ahead and do that. You can also, as I mentioned in the beginning, raise your hand and we can allow you to unmute and ask your question live. If you would prefer to do that and not type it out. So we'll just jump right in. So one of the questions was, what are some of the criteria on which applicants are considered? So Cynthia, did you maybe want to start on that one?
Sure. So Schmidt's evaluation criteria, they're really looking for 3 big points, or they have 3 umbrellas. One is intellect, the other is programmatic fit, and the third is leadership. So under intellect, they're looking for extraordinary achievement. They want to see a clear record of academic achievement of the highest quality in the sciences and an extraordinary degree of intelligence. And also scientific curiosity, so a high degree of intellectual curiosity combined with, energy and creativity, a record of continuous innovation and use of new technologies, desire to achieve a broad level of exposure to and knowledge in cutting-edge innovations and research across the sciences. And for programmatic fit, they're looking for, alignment with the program, a commitment to pursuing a year or more postdoc study and a field different from the topic of study for which the applicant received their PhD, and a belief that interdisciplinary science and the taking of appropriate scientific risks are important for the advancement of discovery. And under programmatic fit, they want to see a demonstrated history of effective collaboration with diverse team members. Schmidt really believes that big, bold ideas of, changing how science training is done. They want to help scientists have multiple approaches to solving problems. So, that's something to consider too. For leadership, they're looking for, genuine and clear potential for science leadership, because Schmidt really wants fellows to, take on these grand challenges and take risks. They do consider that, someone might fail, and they're okay with that. They want to see you persevere. They want to see that resilience. They want you to have a moral compass and be a galvanizing force of personality. They also want global ambition for social good, a desire to use one's personal talents in science to make a positive difference in society and the world, pursue knowledge that will benefit the world by engaging in ambitious research. And then, of course, they emphasize the displaying great perseverance and the appetite for risk. And Natsumi and GOT, when you were being considered as candidates or as fellows by the program, do you think that this evaluation criteria was focused on, were there any aspects of it that they focused more on than others?
I guess my information is might be a little outdated in some sense. When I applied, it was 2019, I think. So things like the program has grown a lot since then. But with regard to the intellectual, the intellect requirement, I would just mention that you should, as applicants, one should not necessarily think that intellect just means having a science or nature publication. I think what is more important is whether your work is important. And the fact is that from my experience of knowing community members, not all of them have very fancy so-called high impact publications, but the colleagues in their field think that that's a really significant work. Mm-hmm. And as candidates, they have an idea why their work is important. It's not just their PI telling them, oh, do this, and suddenly you get a science paper and, oh, now you are intellectual. No, it's more an idea whether you have a good understanding of your work and why is it important in the context of your field or even outside. I think that is very important. And as long as that shines through, I think it helps set yourself apart. And again, they do consider interdisciplinarity even during a drive for interdisciplinarity, during your PhD. I can tell you that in my case, one thing that I believe was useful to them is that although I worked with materials, they were meant to be used outdoors. So they interacted a lot with the atmosphere. So I had to learn a little bit about atmospheric science as well. And they quite liked the fact that I was working on materials and optics, but also I understood and could work a little on the atmospheric sciences front. And the willingness to go beyond what your department or your advisor does to do or learn something new or use something new from a different field is, I think, something really important and helps set yourself apart. So those are the two things that immediately come to mind. I'll defer to Natsumi. I think she might have a much more recent picture than I do.
No, I actually agree with everything that you said. In a sense that, as Jyoti already described, you don't really have to have science nature paper as long as you understand that why your work is important and you have clear initiative about your research. I think that's what they care the most. I was thinking about what I might want to add to that. So I know that recently they started caring a lot about non-research highlight from your PhD time as well, meaning that like what else did you do outside of research that you are really proud of. So I know that that started to become one of the focuses these days. And another thing that might be a little minor to compare to other points would be that they do care that you are able to collaborate through research with other groups and other people. So that might be something that you want to think about. But I'll stop here.
Thank you both. Okay, jumping into the next question is, can the applicant have prior experience in the field they are trying to transition to? Cynthia, that may be one that you, I mean, I'm sure Jyoti and Natsumi, maybe you have some, like, how much experience did you have? Like, did you had you studied anything in your pivot field, or was it really quite new for you?
I guess I can go ahead. So I can tell you of my experience. So my pivot was really organic in a sense. So I used to make, so I think my story rather than something more formal would be instructive here. So I used to make optical materials that would go on buildings for cooling and heating buildings. And the way I used to test them is using cameras, heat vision cameras. So I started thinking, okay, I make a lot of these materials that might be used in these cameras, and they can make these cameras much lower cost and democratize the technology. So I was thinking more about like using my energy materials in the field of optics. So that's how I pivoted. It was very organic. I did have some experience of using thermal cameras in the past, but just a beginner's familiarity. And I was thinking, like, why not? Like, the idea was to take my prior skills, apply that to a field that I have some familiarity with, but not like, a graduate student or a postdoc's familiarity. And like, bring in something new into the field, and in turn, like, learn something new and do something really exciting. So I don't think anyone would have said that my pivot was like a very large pivot, but I would say it was sufficiently new, but also sufficiently practical. And I was not like, looking at hot fields or like, really growing fields and trying to jump into it. It was just a question that came to my mind, and it was an interesting question, and they liked that. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, the question was, maybe I misunderstood. The
The question was whether or not the applicant can have prior experience in the field they're trying to transition to. So I think, sort of like, does it have to be a completely new field, or can you kind of have some familiarity with it already?
I see. So my transition was very big. So I needed to learn a lot of things. So I think my experience doesn't really apply here, but I know other cohort fellows who has a little bit of prior experience in the field that they're transitioning to. And I think it's all about how you frame the pivot, right? Like although you have some overlap or similarities, as long as you believe that that is a change that you want to make, and that is a change that's going to benefit your future, I believe there are ways to convince the panels that it is a pivot. And I usually recommend, like, whenever people are interested in applying to this fellowship, some people really think that, there are fields that they're really interested in, but because it's too similar, they kind of try to come up with something really new for the application. And my advice to them is always that, well, talk about research that you're genuinely interested in. And because that's something that, gets through the Zoom screen when you are interviewed. So yeah, I think that's what I would say.
Advice to do something that you're excited about, right? Like that.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, that's the whole point. Yeah.
One thing that I would like to add is they do want to see you qualified well enough for the pivot that you are making. I mean, if I say that I want to do cancer research, I would likely not get the fellowship, right? So
Okay.
it has to be
Fair enough.
And like what Natsumi said is also really important. Like, and I tell this independent of this fellowship, but I think they understand it very well. Both postdocs and the fellowship program are well aware that postdoc is a really hard time, a volatile time. It's a like, you know, you have a few years, it's stressful, you go through a lot of things. So don't try to get the fellowship, like don't aim for the fellowship itself and do something that is really out of your wheelhouse, because that will make the next 2 years very tough for you. It has to be something that comes to, like, you feel excited by, and something that is like, you know, you think is reasonable and the program think is reasonable. Don't just pivot to get the fellowship. That's how I would put it. Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, I think those answers were fantastic. But, you know, again, just to like emphasize, you know, Schmidt feels that you need to be able to look at, you know, these problems that you'd like to solve through multiple interdisciplinary lenses. So again, you know, just like Natsumi and Jyoti were saying, you know, it should represent a genuine departure from your PhD studies and be innovative enough. And you should demonstrate that, you know, this will help you gain new skills in a new area and establish this, you know, field leading line of research that has this high reward and high societal impact.
Thank you, Cynthia. I think we've talked about this next question a little bit, but I will throw it out there just in case, you know, particularly for Jyoti and Natsumi in terms of your interactions with other Schmidt Fellows. But what are the traits of successful Schmidt Fellows applicants? So, you know, what is your observation about the kind of person who ends up, you know, getting this award? And
Okay, I'll go again. I think they're very diverse. What I think stands out among them is like, you know, they have a genuine desire to do something meaningful and good. Like, you know, in scientific and to the extent possible societal terms. But aside from that, like, you know, there are people coming in from really all walks of life, all kinds of backgrounds, and they are all extraordinary people, but like they do care about what they're doing, and like, you know, wanting to do good scientific research, and like, you know, they are either genuinely passionate about, like, you know, continuing similar research, like, you know, building on it as a lifelong endeavor, or like, you know, trying to bring technologies to the world, and like, you know, like making an impact. So that's so a sincere desire to make an impact, a good impact is something that I think stands out among the cohort.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that, and that's something I was told when I was interviewing for this fellowship too, which was the just talk about what kind of impact that, like, really high and long impact that you want to make in the society. And I think that's something that everyone shares in the community. And I keep it short this time.
okay, thank you. All righty, moving along. The next question is there anything we can be doing now during our PhD to make us more attractive applicants?
Okay, maybe I'll go first this time.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah, so I will say two things. The first is, of course, about your research. You know, think about why your research is important for the society, and also if there are any opportunities that you can take initiative for the research versus, you know, your PI tell you what to do. If there are some opportunities for you to come up with some ideas and take the lead for that, go and do it, because that's something that you can talk about when the time for the application. So that's about research. And like, you know, start thinking about if you were to pivot into some new field for the postdoc, what would that be? Maybe start thinking about that. So that was about research. And when it comes to outside of research, because as I said, the interest about what you do outside of research for the society has becoming more and more important these days in the selection process. So think about what you care about outside of research and maybe work on that. For me, it was, working for women and gender minority in STEM. So I was involved in a lot of outreach programs, which I felt the program really liked. So think about something that you care about outside of research and start working on it, would be my advice.
I would say that if the application deadline, at least for this year, is in the next month or so, it's probably a bit late to change things too much.
Oh,
And in any case,
sorry.
no, I
I
mean
thought
that.
that
Maybe
Kristen was
attendees
like,
who are not applying in this cycle. Like, I mean, it's an open information session. So, so folks may be applying in this cycle, but they may also be just thinking ahead to maybe planning it for the next cycle as well. So, yeah.
So I would say that, like, again, like, don't try to tailor, like at this point, it's too late to tailor yourself too much to get the fellowship. So I would say that, like, focus on like what you really want to do and what your strengths are. Make sure that it is reflected in your application, because they are just getting those pieces of paper. So make sure that, like, they see you in their application. And I think it's really important to have a mature view of where your work fits in, or what do you think the significance of your work will be, your future work will be. I think that is something that you could think about within a week and like write a very good application, but that is probably something that is within your hands. How to make sure that your what is in your mind like gets across to the reviewers, because at this point, like, adding extra lines to your resume, it will just stress you out more. So just try to like improve your application and your thought process towards that.
Thank you. Okay, moving to the next, and Cynthia, this might, and though the fellows may also know how this works, how will the discipline be decided for each of the prospective fellows? It sounds like maybe you kind of, when you make your application, you're sort of saying, this is the discipline that I want to pivot to. Is that correct? So.
Yes, I would say so. Okay, sorry, maybe you
No,
have
no,
another idea.
No, I was just, yeah, I was going to agree. I would say that this is up for the applicant to decide.
That you're really proposing the pivot that you want to make as you make your application, right? Okay, very good. Okay. Here, the next question is, how much of a say do fellows have in which lab they end up going to? Do we know that?
I can say like that in my case, things changed because of COVID, but the initial plan was to work for like 8 or 9 months in UCLA and then go back to Columbia to work with a different professor. So there is a lot of flexibility. They want you to move out of your institution for sure, and possibly moving out of your city just so that you are in a new environment. But there are many circumstances that are considered. For example, if you already have family, then you might want to stay closer to like your original place of staying. So there are multiple circumstances, but what they want you to see is that you do change your environment, like however that may be, and like that you put your best efforts to actually go to a place which also represents a pivot in terms of culture and not just the topic. So they want to see both of that. And sometimes it might be as simple as going to a different department within the same university, because how should I put it? Civil engineering and applied physics, they have very different cultures. So even and different ways of looking at problems. So just that might be a pivot in itself, even though they are in the same institute. But yeah, don't feel that it will be that you must go to a certain lab, or and sometimes you are asked to provide some potential labs that you could work in, but those are just names. They are not they are not commitments. That's my understanding. So Natsumi, did you have any?
No, I think you covered most of it for me. I will just add the in Schmidt Fellowship, there is something called Academic Council, where it consists of like 5 to 6 senior faculty members across different universities all over the world, and they will help you figure out the potential groups if you want to. If you already had like some really clear mind in your mind, like, they will just approve it. But if you want to explore options with them, that's available. You can do that too. And I wanted to emphasize that, of course, you have to mean what you say in application, but they're not going to bound you. You're not bound to what you say in application, including the potential groups, as Jyoti pointed out.
I think they want to see that you have actually put some thought into where you want to go. And if you have a good, like reasonable idea, but it's just an idea at this point. Again, it's not a commitment. But it should kind of reflect, people should understand, okay, this applicant has actually thought about where he or she wants to go, and it makes a reasonable sense. Just they want to see how deeply you've thought about this. That's all.
So there is a related question, which is, what factors did you take into consideration when choosing your potential labs? So how did you go about? Like, did you have a really clear sense of where you wanted to go, or?
Yeah, so when the time comes when you submit your full application, you do have to have some options that's really well thought, as he pointed out. And what I thought was, of course, the research I'm proposing. I proposed what kind of research I want to do as a postdoc, and I thought about what kind of groups will let me do this kind of research. So that's one thing. And they will ask you whether this group is within the same institution as you did your PhD, or whether this institution is outside of the country where you do your PhD. So that might be something that you want to think about too. What I mean by that is, you're doing PhD at UCLA. In that case, you might want to, take a look at groups in the Europe as well, for example.
Yeah, it has to be a good pivot. I think that's the case that you have to make for it. It becomes harder to make a case if it's in the same institution, for instance. But I would say that if you get the fellowship, a lot of groups would be open to what you want to do. In my case, I actually just asked one person, Professor Ashwath Raman in UCLA, and he said yes, and I actually didn't ask anyone else. But I would say that, more than when that time comes, more than the fellowship, the choice of advisor is more important for your postdoc. Otherwise, it can end up being a gilded cage. So, that is having a good advisor is probably the best thing you can do for your postdoc. But perhaps we can have a chat about that later when that time comes.
Awesome. Thank you. Apologies for the camera hiccup there. Oh, there it goes again. Something's going on with my video. I apologize. Okay. So, all right, I guess I'm going to go off camera for a little bit because my camera is not cooperating. So, what is the most unexpected thing you have learned by being part of the Schmidt Scholar cohort?
A really good question. What is the I sense that they're looking for something slightly negative, but I would actually talk about something positive, and hopefully Jyoti will come up with something while I talk. The thing that I was not expecting before getting into this community was, how close we are to Schmidt program staff and other fellows. I've been in 3 fellowship communities so far, but the Schmidt fellow community is by far the closest one that I been in. And I think that's because, the program staff actually put efforts into building a community among us, as well as we have global meeting 3 times a year, and we spend a week together. And that's a great opportunity for us to get together and get close to each other. So yeah, that was a really good surprise for me. And I will stop here.
Thank you, Natsumi.
At my end, just to echo what Natsumi said, the community is very close. I guess I didn't have any expectations one way or another, but I was actually very pleasantly surprised by looking back at how joining the community affected my thought process. So back then, I was mainly working on materials. I did have an environmental inclination, but the fact that I actually got to talk with atmospheric scientists or chemical engineers or photonics people who are my friends now, and the fact that we can get together and talk about problems and come up with ideas and solutions, I think that is really exciting. It actually shifted my focus more from just pure materials development to what are the impact of these materials on the earth system or climate change and things like that. So it does broaden your view a whole lot, and that in some ways can be very definitive. The fact that I'm now in civil and environmental engineering, although I'm doing optics, is in some ways a testament to that. It does change, it does change your worldview, how you judge or consider things from a very interdisciplinary perspective. And it's not just something that they put in paper to make something more attractive. It actually does happen to you. So I think that's something that can be very meaningful.
Apparently now my camera's not working at all. So, so I apologize. But okay. Thank you both so much for that. I am there's some overlap in some of the submitted questions. So I'm trying to find some, maybe some that are new. Also though, if folks who are listening in, if you want to put questions in the chat or raise your hand, if you have, additional questions that have occurred to you from hearing our scholars talk, anything that you want to throw out there, now is the time. Here's a question. What characteristics make Schmidt scholars distinct as opposed to your other grad school postdoc peers? What do you think distinguishes someone who is willing to make the pivot, I guess is the question.
So the question is, what?
Yeah, what makes or do you do you think you and your Schmidt cohort peers are different, say, than other postdocs that you've interacted with or folks that you knew in grad school? What is distinctive about individuals who pursue this opportunity?
Wow, that's a very difficult. Okay, this is really hard. So do you wanna take this first?
So I can tell about myself. In my case, the distinction is in terms of luck. To be very honest with you, there are really talented people. Sometimes they tend to like one people more than other. If I applied the next year, I might not have gotten it. So there's a bit of luck involved. But I would also say that they really like people who are genuinely good, interested in science, and they are focused on challenges and not specific disciplines. Say when you are trying to solve a problem, you have to go where the question takes you, and not just to say I'm a material scientist, so I'll stay within my domain. So they want to see that that drive, that I'll just do whatever it takes to get to the solution. like I'll cross disciplinary boundaries, learn new things, because the goal is to solve a problem and not like, stay within a certain discipline or having a certain label to my name. I think that is something that I have always seen among my fellow fellows. But I think that is the case for like, big enough subset of the PhD population as well. Now, among whom of them, whom among them gets to become Schmidt Science Fellows is a bit random in some ways, but I'm sure they have their own selection criteria. But but that is the one characteristic that I'd say is stands out. Yeah.
Thank you so much, both of you. So I'm not seeing any additional questions in the chat or any raised hands. So I guess any final thoughts that either of you have, in terms of, I mean, I think you've shared a lot of great information with our participants today, but any final thoughts about, the process, your pivot, any final words of wisdom before we close out this webinar?
I will just repeat what I said in a sense that I know that it might sound a lot that they're asking for a pivot, but my usual recommendation is to stick to what you're generally interested and excited for. And with that, I will just say, if you have any further questions or if you want to chat further in person, one-on-one, you are more than welcome to reach out to me, and I'm gonna be dropping my email in a chat.
Thank you, Natsumi.
I would also echo Natsumi and say that it's important to make important to be interdisciplinary and to make a pivot, but you should also be genuine, because the people who evaluate are pretty good at figuring, like, there are multiple stages of evaluation, so they will test you in many ways, but as long as you are honest with yourself and genuinely want to do something new, learn something new, I think that is the most important thing, and please try to make sure it comes across in your application. I think that is probably the most you can do at this stage. But yeah, and I'm also happy to answer any specific questions that you may have. I can be reached in my Princeton email address. My UCLA one no longer works for some reason, but yeah, happy to chat more.
Perfect. All righty. Well, thank you both so much. And thank you, Cynthia, for, for joining, and all of our attendees for joining us today. I will go ahead and stop the recording. And